let's dive straight in. And actually, one of the best places for us to start is with the data. Is around that stuff around, doing your research, making sure you're clear about what the business is that you're running, what the trends are in that business are, and that's one of the areas that Business IP Centre can really help with.
What might your local BIPC, your local library, or your BIPC here in St Pancras have? Well, they might have databases, they might have Cobra, they might have Mintel,
Fantastic.
Yes.
And we have, speaking of Mintel, we have Mintel here. Can you give a warm round of applause for Richard Shepherd, who's Head of Social and Economic Research at Mintel? And one of the things that impressed me about Richard when we were just speaking beforehand, Richard, you were talking about how beneath all of that data is people. So thank you so much for being here with us today. If you want to take the stage, and there will be an opportunity to ask Richard questions for the end of this session. So a real warm welcome to you.
Hello. Do I have a clicker? Do I have a clicker? Is it this? Do I have a clicker?
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
There it goes.
Yeah.
Hello. Yes, my name's Rich. I'm here today to talk about how to understand today's customers. I'm going to talk through some key market trends. And the whole reason really to be here is, if you start in a startup, you're going to have to find some customers to sell your stuff to. The insights that I'm going to go through, the trends that I'm going to talk about, they're influenced by a few things. They're influenced by the economy. They're influenced by individuals' personal circumstances. And they're also influenced by changes and trends in consumer behaviour. A lot of the work that I do is in consumer behaviour and consumer insights in general. So at Mintel, the first thing that you need to do to understand consumers is come to us, hopefully give us lots of money. We'll then give you all the answers that you need to know, and you can go off and make lots of money too. But we've been around for over 50 years, and our aim is to try and cover products and services that really span the consumer-facing economy. But yeah, most of the work that I do cuts across those categories. So hopefully, regardless of where you're coming from, regardless of the category that you're working in, hopefully over the next 45 minutes or so, there's going to be something interesting that you can take away and put into your business. So I'm going to start off looking at the economy. I'm going to try not to spend too much time on this, but it's always important to try to start from a foundation point of understanding where consumers are, what it is that they're dealing with, what pressures they're facing. And so to start, this is a chart that looks at GDP growth over the last few years. Anyone with any sort of passing interest or familiarity won't be surprised by what I'm showing here. But the picture when you look at GDP, the broadest measure of economic output, is that growth has been pretty anemic for a number of years. Basically since the initial bounce back from the pandemic, which you can see on the left-hand side of the chart. If we scoot all the way over to the right-hand side, you can see that at the start of this year, we did have a pretty positive result in Q1, 0.7% growth in the economy. There's a big caveat to that, which was there was a sizable element of front-loaded business ahead of the end of the financial year. So we always expected growth to dip as we went into the second quarter and beyond. We did see that. We've just got the figures for Q3, and it's a continuation of that trend. And Q4, the outlook for Q4 is pretty much the same. I've just talked about this for about a minute and a half. Consumers don't care about this, but it's important to start here because this informs a lot of the general mood and general feeling, and that then impinges on consumer confidence and how they go out and choose to spend their cash. What's much more important for consumers is what we can see here. The dark blue line, this is CPI, so this is a broad measure of inflation. And then the other two lines are average wage growth, total and regular wages. You'll see that the trend, as you'd expect, is pretty similar with both of those. If I have to choose, I usually put more truck in regular wages because it strips out stuff like bonuses, which aren't guaranteed. But this is the key defining story of the last few years. If we start in sort of the middle of 2021, you can see this is the start of the period where inflation is rising month on month, and that goes through 2021 into 2022 and peaks at a 4-decade high in around October of 2022. This period in the middle, this is the cost of living crisis. This is where every single month the average consumer is experiencing a decline in their spending power, and finances were really damaged in that period. The key thing is that it didn't end there. So as we get onto the right-hand side of the chart there, you can see that we've had around 2 years now where we've seen wages consistently rise more quickly than prices. So this is good news, and this is where we can see households starting to recover and repair that damage that was done. But falling inflation doesn't mean that prices are declining. Those high rises that we've seen in that 2022-23 period are baked in. And so while people are recovering, that's the key word. It is recovery, it's not straightforward, and it's not easy, and it's not instant. If we go right to the far right-hand side of the chart and we look at what's happened this year, we've seen a tightening of these factors converging again, which is something that we don't like to see, which consumers don't like to see. CPI is stable. It's been around 3.8% according to the ONS for the last 3 months. The good news is the Bank of England is pretty confident that we've reached the peak of inflation for this period. But at the same time, wage growth has been declining, and that's been as the labour market has started to tighten up a little bit. So for the average consumer, they're still getting wealthier, just about. Their wages are still going ahead of prices. But the average person doesn't exist. So while this is the overall picture, there are some people who have already fallen back into an income squeeze. And this is important, again, because it affects mentality and what people can do with their cash. I am going to be more optimistic as we go through. But not yet. So that chart there was looking at inflation on a total economy level. If we dig in a little bit deeper, there are some stories that we can pick out. So I've just picked out food and drink inflation here. For the last few months, it's been consistently higher than the overall rate. And this is important because food and drink, staple areas, these are things that people engage with very, very regularly. They're more likely to notice price rises. You know, if you're going to the same shelf, you're buying the same items every week, and that price is edging up every time you go there, it can have an impact on how you feel about spending. And so this is the latest data from September. You can see overall CPI 3.8%. Slightly higher for food and drink, and about the same rate as the average wage growth. So if we look at those staple areas in grocery, the stuff that people are noticed on a regular basis, they're not surging ahead at all. They're kind of just keeping above water, and they're kind of bobbing along. And people notice this very, very quickly. So this is the first piece of consumer data that I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you a lot of consumer data, so try and keep up. What you can see here, this is a question that we ask people every month. We give them a range of issues that they may have encountered over the last couple of months, all related to prices. And you can see by far and away the most common issue that people report is increases in food and drink prices at supermarkets. Now, if you compare that to some of the things that come underneath, such as energy prices, that increase in the cost of a bottle of milk, that increase in the cost of a ready meal, isn't really going to have the same impact as some of these higher ticket issues. But psychologically and in terms of mentality, they notice it more quickly. And it can impinge on overall confidence because it can get people into this mindset where prices feel like they're spiraling. And if they're in areas such as grocery where people can't opt out, it can make them more cautious with their other spending decisions. And it's not just inflation. So I've spent many years working in financial services research. I'm only going to show you one slide on financial services. This is mortgages, average mortgage rates for a range of mortgage products over the last few years. And as inflation rose, you know, the biggest tool that the Bank of England has got to combat that is the base rate. And so as the base rate's been elevated, every area of lending has become more expensive, and mortgages is the most impactful area of this. On this chart here, it's not really important to look at the recent changes. It's more important to look at where people are now and where prices are now compared to, if we draw a line, I mean, you can draw your own line kind of halfway through there, but towards the back end of 2022, where interest rates in mortgages started to really explode, the difference between where we are now and where people were then, people are paying around twice as much in interest payments as they were a few years ago. And because of the nature of mortgages, even as interest rates come down, and hopefully they'll come down more substantially, if you've got a 5-year fixed rate mortgage, then that increase that you saw a couple of years ago is baked in until the end of that term. So even as things improve, there's a delay in it being felt in people's wallets. And it's not just mortgages. You know, if you've got unsecured lending, that's more expensive to service now than it was before. So if you put all this together, inflation, interest rates, you get this mentality among consumers that comes through really quite strongly that the cost of living crisis, I mentioned before that it's in that sort of middle period in 2022, 23. For most Brits, they say it's still an ongoing issue. This, again, is a piece of research. We ask this question every single month. I never expected we'd still be asking this at the back end of 2025. But this is from last month, this is from October. And 2/3 of Brits told us then that the cost of living crisis is still not getting any better. I think this is the most pessimistic I'll be. I'll try and lift it up from now. But the sense is that people are still very much in this recovery mindset. They're still facing challenges on a daily basis. And that things aren't straightforward in terms of the recovery. And I'm going to touch more on that shortly. So I'm going to move on to a load of consumer data now where we're looking at sentiment, because all of that macro stuff, it only really matters so much in terms of how it affects how people behave and what they choose to do with their cash. So this is a really ugly chart. I'll explain it a little bit. This is an index of current financial well-being, so how people feel about their finances now. We've been running a question that feeds into this, and I'll show that on the next slide. It'll contextualize it a little bit more. We've been running that research since 2009. This chart starts in 2016, and the story really, we can skip ahead to the start of the pandemic. So around the middle of the chart, from the start of 2020, we have this story where financial well-being improved consistently through lockdowns. And that might sound like a bit of a confusing statement, but basically people found that they weren't spending as much cash as they ordinarily would. Most people were still having an income coming in, you know, if they were furloughed or if they were working from home or whatever it might be. And so actually the average consumer felt better off during lockdown than they did before, financially, maybe not socially or in any other way, really. But as we go through that period, we see financial well-being reach a high point around the middle to end of 2021. And then from that point, we see a decline. And so it basically mirrors that first chart that I showed you on CPI. As inflation rises, financial well-being dips. And that happens consistently through until the end of Q1 2023. And so you can already see a lag there because that's around 5-6 months after the peak of inflation. So by that point, inflation was already falling. But then the main reason why I'm showing you this chart now is to show where people are at currently. So they've been through a turbulent time. But once the recovery started in 2023 and into 2024, it's been very stop-start. It's not been linear. I was foolish enough in the summer when I wrote our review of Q2 to say that we'd had enough of a sustained increase in well-being to kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. People were feeling better. The cost of living crisis, we could see a way out of it. Clearly, the universe thought I was being too hubristic, and then we've seen these declines that you can see on the end of the chart there into Q3. And it's just to emphasize that stop-start nature of this recovery. The good news is that chart, it's all okay. So we do see changes, we do see fluctuations, but most people are okay most of the time. This is the latest data that feeds into that index chart. And so you can see we give people a range of 5 options just to quite bluntly describe how they feel about their finances. And last month, 30% of people described their finances as healthy. That's defined as having enough to cover everything that you need to pay for, then having enough left over to put into luxury purchases, savings, investments. Basically, you've got enough money to make quite simple choices and to not have to worry about cash. And then another 45% said things are okay. And that's just a little bit worse off. So they're covering everything. They've still got some cash left over, but it's not, a huge amount of money. We then have these minority towards the right-hand side where people are finding things difficult, they're struggling. That never really changes a huge amount. So even during the height of the cost of living crisis, the most that we ever saw in terms of proportion of people who said they were struggling, you can see it's 6% in October. That's kind of a normal baseline that we see quite often. The highest that ever really got was around 9%. When we see changes on the index chart that I showed before, they can be influenced by quite subtle changes, and it's often these first 3. So it's people who were previously feeling, pretty healthy, pretty well off. Maybe they drop down into just feeling okay, or vice versa. So the main takeaway here is that even though people have had all these challenges over the last few years, 3/4 of Brits have got cash available to make decisions with. So they have an opportunity, brands have an opportunity to engage with them and persuade them what to do with that spare cash after they've covered the essentials. I mentioned before that the average consumer doesn't exist, and so it's important to point out that we do have lots of inequality within the data set. I've just picked out two quite cliche, quite obvious demographic splits, but just to show the extent of those inequalities. Hopefully I'm not surprising anyone too much by saying that higher earners are more likely to feel well off, but you can see the extent, of that trend. And this is important when you're developing new businesses, new products, new services, because these income bands, they don't really change all that much, but depending on how people are feeling really impacts, the type of claims that we should be making with products. So for example, if higher earners are doing particularly well, that's great if you're looking to launch luxury products and services. If lower earners, or middle earners in particular, are feeling quite restricted, then that's a great time to be launching budget products and making those price-related value claims. On the right-hand side, it's a similar trend. There'll be lots of the same people in the higher earning bracket as in the home ownership. But housing tenure, I mentioned before about mortgage rates. It's the same with rents. As mortgage rates go up, so do rents. And they don't fall. If your landlord put your rent up substantially in 2023, just because they didn't follow that up in 24 and 25, and they may well have done, your rent isn't coming down, so you're still playing catch up. So it's a great time for people to not be encumbered by accommodation costs. And you can see when you look at the people who own their home outright, just how influential that is. So 47% of people who don't have accommodation costs feel pretty good about their finances. Now, all that stuff is important because it's the start of segmentation. So when we're trying to pick out different consumer groups to sell products to, those types of splits around financial capability are really, really important. But they can be quite difficult to discern. How do I identify a well-off group? How do I identify a higher earner without knowing who they are? And so quite often what people will do is they'll lean onto simpler demographics. We've got generations here. Generation, age, pick your poison. They kind of tell the same story. The reason why I'm showing this here is because it's important to try and consider how these things interrelate with each other. If you were to look at this chart here, you'd be well within your rights to say, okay, I'm launching a new business, I'm going to launch some new products, and I'm going to target them solely at baby boomers. I'm going to target them solely at retirees because 40% of them have got healthy finances, another 44% have got okay finances. They've got all the cash and they're willing to spend it. What that doesn't take into account is life stage and how that impacts what people's own personal definitions of these things are. So if you've got lots of financial responsibilities and you feel that you've got healthy finances, then that's great, but you may be more inclined to put that spare cash into savings and investments for a rainy day because you know that you've got major bills, family members, whatever it might be to cover for. If you're in the Gen Z group, and it's important to note that none of these are homogenous groups, so there's pull the thread as much as you want, there's caveat upon caveat. But if we talk generally about younger people in that Gen Z group, they've got lower levels of financial commitments and responsibilities. Their definition of healthy could be different because their definition of essentials is different. So if you're, I'm going to pick on Gen X because they're the forgotten generation. But if you're in Gen X and you've got grown-up kids, you've got a mortgage that you're still servicing, essentials are essential. They are bills. If you're in Gen Z, you may still live with parents. You don't have accommodation costs. You don't have major bills to pay. Your essentials may be 2 nights out a week. Your essentials may be socializing with people. It may be buying, whatever it is that otherwise we would consider non-essential purchases. If you're not able to do that, that's when you feel tight up. That's when you feel hard-pressed. And so we have to be careful and we have to interpret these numbers quite carefully. And so, I just wanted to show this chart just to show how financial well-being, financial capability is relative among different groups. And actually, if I was to launch a new business now, if I was to launch a new product, yes, you can go for the grey pound, never forget that. But it's a cliche, but it's a stereotype, but it's for a reason. Younger people are more open to new ideas. They are more open to new experiences. I'll touch on that in a bit. And they are also freer from financial responsibility. So the numbers here might not differ that much between generations, but the circumstances do. Just one slide looking quickly at how things have developed. So one way to look at how things have changed over time is that index chart on financial well-being that I showed you before. We can also bluntly ask people how things have changed. And there's two things to take away here. One is the good news is most people are at least feeling no worse off than last year. So we have turned the corner in terms of that cost of living crisis and moving away from that. But the second thing is these inequalities again. They are baked in and they are being exacerbated by this sort of two-speed recovery that we do see. Looking ahead with financial confidence, it's another index chart. I won't spend as much time on it. You can see that it follows a pretty similar path to financial well-being. When we ask people about their confidence for the coming year, it's the hardest thing that we ask them to do because we are asking them to predict the future. Because of that, you can see that the results are a little bit more jaggedy. We do see more volatility as people respond to news stories or economic events or whatever it might be. But we can see that generally the trend is the same. The good news is that the dip that we saw in well-being in Q3 this year hasn't really been replicated in confidence, so people are still pretty confident for the year ahead. When we ask them to think about the year ahead, you could think about any aspect of the economy when we ask about finances, but generally people look inwards and they look at their own personal situation because that's what they can control, it's what they understand. And again, you can see that most people expect to do okay over the next year. A big reason for that, despite all the sort of gloomy economic news stories that people are surrounded by, is that when they're looking inwards, they look at their job security, and most people feel pretty confident that they're going to be okay in their current role. I mentioned before about the labour market tightening up, and we're seeing wage growth dip, we're seeing vacancies dip, we're seeing unemployment rise fairly consistently, but still in quite a modest fashion. We haven't yet seen a dip in perceived job security. It's something that we're keeping an eye on. But this is important because if you feel like you're going to be in the same role in a year, if you're confident that you're not going to lose your job, it gives you that footing to actually think about what it is that you're going to do in that time. What are you going to look to do over the next year? What do you want to achieve? There are some shaky elements of sentiment around the job market. So while most people feel pretty confident in their role, only half expect to get a pay rise over the next year. That does rise among younger workers, so around 2/3 of under 35s, where people are more, they're in a stage of their career where they've got more opportunities for career progression. But still, it sort of shows that people are not certain that things are going to get a huge amount better over the next year, and so that can bleed a little bit of conservatism into their approach. And we see that on the left and the right-hand side. So most people think that they'll be fine in their current role, but only 56% think they could get a new job if they had to. So again, if you're concerned about that, you're less likely to look around. You're more likely to sort of accept that maybe the grass isn't greener, maybe you're going to stick around and see what happens in your current role. And as a result, only 35% expect to look for a new job in the next year. Now, if a third of the labour force changed jobs, that would be seismic. So, we wouldn't expect people to change jobs, but just to look for a new one is a much more low level of engagement. And the fact that only a third are actually interested in seeing what might be out there, again, just reinforces this conservatism that people are showing. When people are asked to look outside of their personal situation, this is where we get that downbeat mood. And this is where stuff like GDP that I mentioned before is kind of influential. So this is from August. Nothing's really changed since then. But back then, just 27% of Brits expected the economy to improve in the second half of the year. That's important because it feeds into personal circumstances quite quickly. So just 24% expected their standard of living to improve. And then that's where it bleeds into overall sentiment and the mood of the nation. So just 18% expected that to improve over the second half of the year. And all of that I've talked about so far is important, but it's only one side of the coin, right? So when it comes to those macro factors, when it comes to household finances, in the real world, people need to balance that with what it is that they're interested in, what it is that they want to achieve, and what it is that they want to go out and explore. So this is where we need to bring some consumer trends in as well and add on to that story. So I'm going to start by talking broadly about who is the British consumer, and there isn't one, but we can see that people are split. These are 4 sets of paired statements that we ask people to just choose between. It's quite a blunt, rudimentary exercise, but it does throw up some quite interesting findings. So if we start at the bottom here, I don't want to call the British population liars. I do think that people feel like they want to be seen as somebody who prefers to save rather than spend. But, you know, this is a good starting point because it shows that conflict that people have got between saving and spending. And then if you're in a position where you're wanting to get people to part with their money, you need to convince them to spend on anything first, right? Before you even then get to tempt them to spend it with you. The next one up, so you've got 68% of people say they prefer to stay in versus 32% who prefer to go out. So we're quite an introverted bunch. This is really interesting when you look at developing new products and services, because people who prefer to stay in, they're not spending money. There's lots of opportunities, there's lots of categories and markets where we can provide products and services that are going to make that experience of staying at home more enjoyable and also more effective in terms of, you know, what are they achieving while they're at home. When Rashid was going around the room earlier, we heard examples of people launching, you know, online education platforms and stuff like that, and everything from, you know, things such as that, which people can access from home, through to furnishings, through to high-end ready meals. Anything that can make people enjoy that experience of being at home more and enhance that experience is valuable. On the left-hand side, you've then got the people who prefer to go out. This is a more adventurous bunch. But you know already you're thinking about events, you're thinking about leisure and hospitality and what new ideas and concepts can appeal to that group. We've then got whether people prefer to live in the moment or plan for the future. I'm going to touch on that on the next slide a little bit more. And then right at the top, a really important one for startups, you know, do people want to try new things or are they stuck in their ways and stick to what they know? And Brits are pretty much split down the middle on this. So 48% prefer to try new things. That does increase, as I mentioned before, it's a stereotype, but it's a stereotype for a reason. It increases among younger groups. So when we look at under 35s, trying new things, that goes from 48% up to 65%. And it equally, preferring to go out rather than staying in, increases to 46%. I'd still point out that it's less than half, so you know we are a nation of homebodies, but younger people are much more likely to be interested in those new outdoor, out-of-the-home experiences. So I mentioned that I'd touch on people's preference for future planning. That meets the real world in quite a harsh way at the moment. So whether they want to or not, people are finding that they are making plans at more short notice. They are delaying decisions. And this is really closely tied to global events. So if you look on the left-hand side here, 62% of people in September told us that global uncertainty was making it harder to make long-term plans. It's quite consistent across generational groups. But then for younger groups, for Gen Z, younger millennials, let's just call them under 35s, over half of them say that that's having a real-world impact and they are making plans at shorter notice than a year ago. And this has real-world effects for brands as well, because you need to be able to convince people to spend in the moment. So grabbing people's attention, meeting them where they are, different communication strategies. Social media is a huge part of this. Being able to reinforce your messages all the time, because brands are having to fight for every purchase, and this is an example of it. So moving on, I'm just going to talk about 2 key consumer trends that really cut across all categories. The first one is value. Everything that I've talked about so far, from the economics through to personal traits, is couched in a lot of the stuff that we see in value. It remains a really key focus for consumers. So this is sort of half of a question that we asked in August of this year, where we asked people what they expected to do over the next couple of months. I've got 5 of the key findings on here. On the left-hand side, we've got reduce energy use at home. That's just to sort of show, again, reinforce the extent of the challenges some people have got, and the extent of the decisions that they're making to deal with that. So, you know, we all hear about the choice between heating and eating. It's still a really relevant point for a lot of people. More interesting for me, though, is the 4 points on the right-hand side. And you can see it's around a third of people say that this is something that they're going to do or expect to do in the next couple of months. Cutting back on luxuries, shopping more at low-cost retailers, buying more own-label products, reducing spending on leisure and entertainment. So people are willing and feel that they have to cut back on real lifestyle choices and real lifestyle preferences. And so again, just to keep reinforcing that point of fighting for every purchase and proving that there's a value in every purchase that you've got. And value claims can come from a range of different ways. It's not just about price. I'm going to touch on wellness in a moment, and that's a key area where we can have value-added claims. But also things such as durability, multifunctionality. You know, if I pay you some money for this product, what am I going to get in exchange for that? Don't try and read this; it's too small. But we asked people what they've done in the last 3 months, what they plan to do in the next 3 months in terms of a range of example financial activities. We always see that the top response in terms of what people have done is add to their savings. So this is from last month. 56% of people said they'd put extra money into savings. And this is just to show, one, the extent of the challenge for getting people's attention, because you're not just competing with other purchase options, you are competing with that option to save. And in this mindset where people are still in this recover and repair environment coming off the back of the cost of living crisis, that's a stiff challenge. The second one, if you compare the left column, which is what people have done in the last quarter with what they expect to do in the next quarter, touches again on that spontaneity. So we consistently see with savings that people are more likely to say that they've done it than they plan to do it in the next quarter. A lot of it is incidental, so it's a case of getting to the end of the month and having some cash left over, putting it into savings, and that's money they could be putting it into businesses with purchase decisions across the economy. And that feeds into this point, which is that competition is everywhere. It's not just in your category, and I think that a mistake that lots of businesses often make, not just startups, but major established businesses, is that when they think about competition, they think in quite a blinkered fashion just in their category. If you're setting up a new coffee shop, for example, your competitor isn't Starbucks, your competitor is every shop, every cafe, every takeaway that somebody has to walk past to get to your shop. We asked this question in July. We asked people, what would you do if you had a spare £30? Now, the number's fairly arbitrary, but we need to pick a figure. And it's designed to just represent, you've got some cash, it's not a great deal, but you're allowed to go and spend it on whatever you want. And the findings are kind of informative about that level of competition and how the competition comes from many different categories. People are really split on what they'd want to do. So a meal out to a restaurant, a takeaway, clothes and accessories comes in third. Trip to the cinema, theatre or concert, premium food, alcohol for eating and drinking at home, etc., etc. People are really split on what they do with that money. There's a lot of talk about the lipstick effect, and some people will tell you that it's dead, some people will tell you that it's changing. I don't think the lipstick effect will ever die because it's quite a natural response. It's quite a natural behavioural response to people facing challenges or pressures. Why wouldn't you go and spend a small amount on looking after yourself and making yourself feel good? But that's the key point. It's not about a category, it's about the person. So nobody walks out of their house with 30 quid in their wallet and goes, I've got £30 to spend on X or A, B, C. They walk out going, I've got £30 to spend on me. So the product isn't that important. It's what the product does, it's what the product provides, and the feeling that people will get from that purchase. And that leads on quite nicely to wellness. So wellness is nothing new. It's been something that's been growing for a few years, but it is changing. The nature of wellness and business is changing. So in April of this year, 85% of people told us that their physical and mental health was a main priority for them. Yes, thank you, Rich. People want to be healthy. It's not groundbreaking. We would expect a high response there. What is interesting is that middle point. So 47% of people in August told us that their physical health was a higher priority than a year ago. And this speaks to a lot of the things I've already been talking about. So yes, people have got challenges, but overall things are improving. And as things improve and people aren't so encumbered by financial pressures, they're able to think about other things, and their physical health is a key part of that. And on the right-hand side, in particular, we've had a lot of conversation in the innovation space around weight loss, and about a third of Brits have told us that they are actively trying to lose weight. And this is a big reason. A big talking point over the last year or so has been the rise of GLP-1 boosting drugs. So, Ozempic is kind of the poster product for this, but in the UK, more Mounjaro and Wegovy. There's a lot of interest in these products. It's much less controversial than I think people may have expected it to be. Certainly less controversial than they would have been if they were launched a few years ago, I think. And what's interesting for me is the impact that this could have on a number of categories. When we ask people about their interest in it, and this is a question where we asked if people had used these drugs or would be interested in using them in the future, around a third of Brits are interested. The biggest opportunity lies in younger groups, so that rises to around half of under 35s. On the NHS's part, they're more interested on the other side, with older groups and where people are in a pre-diabetic condition or they've got severe obesity issues, and that tends to be the older groups. But the nature of GLP-1 drugs isn't so much in what they look like now, it's what they're going to look like in the future and where additional products come online. So I don't think that half of under 35s are actually willing to buy a drug that they have to inject on a regular basis. But they'll definitely wear a patch, they'll take supplements, and as these products come to market, that become more accessible, easier to take, they're going to be, they tell us that they are interested in trying them. And this is a really interesting phenomena because weight loss drugs, weight loss solutions, medicinal ones, it's kind of, the holy grail, right? It's the new holy grail. You take this pill, if we get to a pill form, and you'll lose weight, and you'll look better, and you'll feel better, and it'll all be great. But that's not the way that people really approach wellness. So it is a really interesting new development. More interesting for me is what we've seen develop more over the last few years, which is this more holistic approach to health and wellness. And this is where any brand from any category can get into this value claim. I've just picked two stats here. I could have picked any number from Mintel research. But 56% of people agree that sometimes the immediate emotional boost of comfort food is more important than healthiness. So you might be launching a cookie company, right? Muffins, whatever, delicious, not healthy, but there is a health claim in there because if, eaten in moderation, these little mood boosts, these little uplifts that people can get from these products do have a wellness claim in them. Similarly, when we look at leisure and hospitality, 37% of people who went to a leisure or hospitality venue last month told us that the mental health benefits that it could provide were an important factor in choosing the venue, choosing the activity. And for context, the only thing that was ranked higher than that was the venue being a space that they could meet family and friends, which, to be honest, has a very similar connotation. And so wherever you are in the economy, whatever category you're in, you can touch on this mood, demand for good feeling. And it's linked to all of the stuff that I've been talking about before, right? So the world can be a scary place. So in the middle of the year, 80% of people were concerned about price rises over the second half of the year, 73% about economic growth, 60% about the job market. So they might not be concerned about their own role, but they think that the job market in general is going south. This doesn't touch on other stuff such as health, doesn't touch on things such as crime or climate change or whatever it might be. And so there are lots of pressures, lots of concerns. At Mintel, we've been talking a lot recently around themes such as the perma-crisis, the poly-crisis, the fact that people are always dealing with lots and lots of different challenges that can bring you down. So wherever you're coming from, if you can provide a product or a service that helps people switch off, helps people just focus on themselves, then again, that's a really important and valuable wellness claim. So I'm going to rush through these final few slides because I think I'm rapidly running out of time. But I just wanted to talk about some other trends that influence what people want from brands themselves. And one of them that we've seen come through really strongly in recent months is localism. And this is linked to a few things. So one of the kicking off points for the current rise in localism was around the tariffs and the link to the disruption in the global economy that we saw in Q1 and Q2. And back in April, 79% of Brits told us that the disruption caused by global trade had shown the importance of supporting local businesses. And because of that, 2/3 of people identified supporting the local economy and supporting local producers as a key priority for them. And then a couple of months later in June, 48% of people told us that they'd bought more British goods in the last 3 months than in the quarter before. Now, whether that's true and they actually had bought more British goods, or whether they just considered it more, doesn't really matter. The fact is that people were thinking more about provenance, where products and services had come from. And so, again, across the economy, no matter what category you're in, if there is a localism claim that, bless you, if there is a localism claim that you can make, do it, because it carries a lot of cachet for people. So whether you're super local and you're working, in a particular region and you can pinpoint the farm that your ingredients came from, do it. If you're looking at a more national level, but you can show that products or services have come from the UK, be careful. Anything can be culture war these days. You might want to be careful with flags. But there are opportunities to play up to this demand and this interest in British businesses and British produce. And something that's related to localism a little bit is the desire for connection and real connection with people. We've seen growth in brand-led communities recently. Communities have been important since the dawn of time. You don't need to write down Rich Shepherd from Mintel says that people like community. But the nature of it has changed. So as people have lived increasingly online, it's never been easier to find your tribe in terms of shared interests. But it's more difficult to find people with whom you have a real deep connection with. And we've found that 41% is quite sizable. 2/5 of people would be interested in joining a community that's been created around a specific brand. And the nature of that brand can be anything, really. So, really disparate examples. You could be a podcast brand that launches a Discord server, and it's seen as a shortcut to shared interests. And once you're then talking to real people in that community, you can identify shared values. If you can then bring that into the real world, you've gone full circle. You've created a really strong community, which brings opportunities for greater connection between individuals, but also the brand and its customers. If you look at something like Patagonia, it's one of those brands that's got really clear, really well-defined values, and people can choose to spend with them because of those. But it's more difficult with a really established brand to build a close community. Where startups have a bit of a head start is that as you start to accumulate customers, you know them much better than bigger companies. So you can really foster this community from the start. And that then helps you when you're devising new products, new services. You can tap into the people who are actually going to spend that money more quickly. Community helps you do that. One thing that if I'd been doing this talk 2-3 years ago would have dominated probably half of the presentation is sustainability. It's relegated to one slide here. That's not because people don't care. It's because they're facing other challenges. So just 9% of Brits say that the environment is less important to them than it was a year ago. But 53% of them are worried that it is less important generally. And this is really, really influenced by financial realities. So, 2/3 of people tell us that the cost of living crisis has made it more difficult to act sustainably. This is an issue, but it creates opportunities for brands to act sustainably on consumers' behalf. So to use a really straightforward example, if somebody's used to buying, say, e-cover household products, and they usually make that purchase because it's a really distinct, explicitly environmentally friendly company that has that ethos at its heart. If they have to trade down because they can't afford that purchase anymore, their demands of the manufacturer, of the producer that they're now paying are no lower. They're still interested in sustainability. So if they're trading down to a known label product, for example, they still want the likes of Tesco or Sainsbury's or whatever it might be to have processes in place to know that they're still making a sustainable purchase. And so whatever brands are doing in that space, they need to be loud about it and make that sustainability claim clear. They also need to be very authentic. So if we go onto the right-hand side, 3/4 of Brits really have doubts around greenwashing. So they think that a lot of companies present themselves as more environmentally friendly than they are. So while sustainable claims are still really important and brands need to make them when they can or should make them when they can, they need to be really, really careful that they're not overstepping the mark and promising something that they're not actually delivering. And then the final point that I'm going to make is just around customer loyalty. So I mentioned before that as a startup, you're going to get to know your customers really well. You're going to be able to foster a community. They're hopefully going to love what it is that you're selling. They're only going to love what it is that you're selling for as long as you can sell them it. People are very fickle. So you can see, hopefully, on this chart here, across a range of categories, technology is a little bit of an outlier. If you're an Xbox gamer or an iPhone user, you're probably not going to switch. So people are more likely to wait. But when we ask people, what would you do if your favorite product wasn't available, we can see that by far the biggest response is they'll go elsewhere. So some people may look to trade up within your brand. That's great. But much, much more likely is that people will look for the same product or a similar product from a different provider. And some of them will use it as an opportunity to trade down. And so while it's important to focus on all of the stuff that I've talked about, all of the more interesting stuff, the nuts and bolts of having robust supply chains and being able to deliver on your promises is super, super important, because it's the easiest way to sort of burn brightly and disappear is to not have stuff in place to follow up on initial success. So I've talked for too long. So just some key takeaways. First of all, uncertainty is really high. People are still in that recovery mindset. The recovery is not straightforward, and there are peaks and troughs and challenges. As a result, people are still really focused on value. So products that offer value add are important. Price is key, cost is key, but it's not just that. If you can make these claims around wellness, around sustainability, around community, then they are resonating strongly with a lot of consumers at the moment. And finally, when it comes to understanding customers, you have to understand that there's no one-size-fits-all approach. So really take targeting and segmentation seriously. Be careful about who it is that you want to speak to and you want to push your products towards. Understand that individual circumstances interact with different factors in different ways. So we've talked about life stage, we've talked about financial capability. These are all important and they all interact in different ways. And finally, understand what it is that people want from your product and service. You, as business owners, will understandably and necessarily think a lot about what the product is. Consumers will oftentimes think about what the product means and what it's going to provide. So think about what the benefits for people are and what solutions they're going to provide to the problems that customers have got. So that's me. I think we've got some time for some questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Can we keep the applause going for Rich? That was fascinating. Really, really, really fascinating. And loved the bits of humour there. Let's see. Who's got our first question of the day? Oh, there's a hand gone straight up here. And there's a few over here. And also Anna's got some online as well. So we'll take one in the room and then our next one online.
Hi, thanks. That was a fantastic presentation, by the way. However, what you didn't cover and what I'm really interested in is just how different those statistics are when you are looking at ethnic minorities, the disabled and women. And I just wondered if you could shed some light on that.
Yes, I can. So when we work in market research, one of the splits that we have is in our every report that we do in the UK is ethnicity. What we have to be careful with, because a lot of the work that we do is, or most of the work that we do is online research, is the online population is different to the real world population. And so what we find when we speak to ethnic minorities in our research is that often that group skews younger than it does in the overall population. Weirdly, it often skews more male than it should. And so when we talk about it, we're very, very careful because we know that there are gaps, right? We know that there are gaps in some of the groups that we speak to. And so what we tend to do is, with our nationally representative sample, we have to be quite, I'll be honest, in my position, unsatisfactory with the way that we use it. But it's because we need to be careful about what it actually means. So for example, if we take ethnicity, and we have the standard ethnicity question in our demographics, but because of the size of some of the groups that come through when we use a national representative sample, we instantly have to group different groups together in ways that aren't really representative of lived experiences. So if we were to look at stuff like what's an example off the top of my head? Beauty, where there's a clear story where we can talk about, you know, the differences between white and non-white people because it comes in the products. That's kind of fine. We can talk about skin tone. If I'm talking about something like financial well-being, and I'm using a sample that I know is not quite there in terms of the overall population, that's where we would use our other resources. So everything that I've presented here is from our syndicated research. We have a consultancy team that would take on stuff like that. But you know, we use broad publicly available sources as well. So the ONS can provide us breakdowns of this. The FCA is sometimes quite good for, I don't know if you've ever read the Financial Lives survey. So that's sometimes a bit better than we can do in talking about those minority groups. With regards to disability, one of the big areas that we do try to do at Mintel across categories as well is about accessibility. So not just in terms of, you know, day-to-day lived experience in physical stores and stuff like that, but you know, digital accessibility and things like that. So yeah, we do cover that. But I didn't talk about it today, and I'm sorry.
And I saw another flurry of hands. Aha, my friend's over there. Yeah. Oh, can pop those hands back up there. Aha, we've got a gentleman here.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, these insights are about the business to consumer side. But is there any relationship with these figures or these insights with the business to business offering, like offering products and services to businesses as opposed to the consumers directly?
Yeah, so I mean, we are consumer insights specialists, so we focus almost exclusively on the B2C. On the B2B, we do consider it, and we try and consider it from a case of the end consumer. So, you know, at some place along the line, there'll be an individual or, you know, a consumer group that somebody's serving. We don't have specific insights on B2B, but where we do consider it is where we're talking more about those macro things. So, you know, I said right at the start, I showed people that chart about GDP and then said nobody cares. Clearly, that stuff is more important when we're talking about B2B. It's more important to consider those broader issues at play.
Thank you.
Okay, there's a hand up here. And Anna, do we want to say anything? We've got a few questions that are coming in online.
Yeah, I would just say hello to everyone tuning in online. Do keep your questions coming in. I can see that BIP Sussex have said hello, that they're streaming the event today. So do just, any questions from our online audience, just pop them in the chat. They should come through to my iPad and we can ask them here in the room. But in the meantime...
Hello, Rich.
Hi.
Thank you very much for the speech. Lots of takeaways for me. One question that I had is, if you had to break it down to only 3 emotional triggers that are shaping customers' decisions today very strongly, what would you think those 3 are? And how can brands use these without being manipulative or being gimmicky at all? Thank you.
It's a great question. 3 things. I think that the first ones that come to mind are price, convenience, and stress. And they're kind of related, right? So we know that people are still under these price pressures. So the first thing that they're going to interact with is the cost of a product or service. You know, there's kind of no getting away from that. I talk about the other value claims that you can make. They're always going to be secondary, because if somebody sees the price tag, that's the first thing that can switch them off. So considering price, and that's where understanding your audience is so important, because it may switch off some people, but for others it's considered cheap. So you need to understand where you lie in the market. So price is key. Convenience is, again, not new, but it's changing every single year because of the way that people can interact with products and services, the data that people have on products and services, the data that brands have on individuals. And if we look at something like the rise of AI, it's so disruptive from both sides of that coin, because individuals are able to find opportunities and solutions and products and services in a much quicker and much more efficient way than they could before. but also AI is lowering the barrier to entry for startups, right? So, you know, if you've don't do this, come to Mintel instead. But you can use ChatGPT and get a quick roundup on, you know, what's happening in this market. You can do that in seconds in the way that it used to be something that would take a long time in the past. Those resources can be misleading, but they can give you a starting point. So convenience is speeding everything up all the time, and people, they don't want convenience, they expect convenience. And then stress, anything that people can do to alleviate stress. I mean, for me, I've got 2 small kids, so that's number 1 for me. But it's again, I mentioned before about people don't care about your product, they care about how it's going to make them feel. And that's the key issue for me. And why you can make those wellness claims from anywhere across the economy. So, you know, I think with wellness, we immediately think about health and fitness, we immediately think about food service, food and drink, and those types of things. I mentioned before that I've spent a lot of time working in financial services. And if you can provide you know, an element of customer service in financial services, it just makes people worry less about their money. You know, that's a really valuable wellness claim. And it just shows that you can come at that from anywhere in the economy.
Okay, let's get a couple more questions in. Anyone else got any questions? There's lots of food for thought, I can tell. Oh, there's one right at the back there, Jordan. Can you see? Yeah, keep your hand up, my friend. Aha, they're both mics are fighting their way to you. Let's see which mic arrives first.
Hi, thank you. I just want to pull on that thread a little bit where you said about the resources and things that are available to startups and young entrepreneurs that are potentially looking to do a bit of market research, whether it's product design or services or things like that. You said obviously asking AI is something, but they're very good at hallucinating and things like that nowadays. Is there any more tools or resources or even like, you know, going out there into the market themselves that they can do relatively low cost just to test it a little bit?
Well, Mintel is free at BIPC centres.
Oh, okay, brilliant.
No, yeah, there's lots. I mean, as a startup, I think what I'd speak to there is, I mentioned before about community and the fact that startups can get to know their customers kind of better than bigger companies. People are open to speaking to people a lot more than I think that they sometimes recognise. So focus groups with real users, you know, it doesn't really matter how many customers you've got. If you can try to speak to them as you're ongoing, you know, what do they like, what do they not like, why are they not spending with you, or why did they not spend with you last week and they've come back this week. These are all really valuable insights. In terms of broader things, I mean, yeah, so do use Mintel. We are great. I promise. And, you know, the BIPC, the partnership that we've got with the BIPC and the availability of our stuff in there is really useful. We've got, I think at the last count, 9 distinct use cases that we define as why do people come to us. All the way from getting up to speed on a market. So, you know, what is the market that you're looking at? How does it work? What are the internal dynamics? Where's spending been in the last 5 years? Where do we project it's going to go in the next 5 years? Through to identifying white space, so where can you play in that market, what niche can you serve, identifying customer groups and segmenting on that. So, we as experts in the industry have got 9 different use cases, and I'm sure that, you know, very much at the position where a lot of you guys are at, you know, when you're pre-startup or you've just started, we'll cover those, and it's important to just understand where you are. So I mentioned before about how competition isn't in category. So whatever you can learn from other categories is also valuable. Because, you know, I'll use the example that I used in the presentation. If you're opening an independent coffee shop, you can learn everything that you want about coffee. It'll take you hopefully not that long because you should know that market. What you want to be doing is looking at convenience stores, what's happening in convenience retail, what's happening in bakeries, what's happening in takeaways and stuff like that. And so getting that broader understanding of the wider market, I think, is really valuable as well, rather than just being blinkered. But yeah, talking to people as much as possible. The work that we do is predominantly quantitative research. So we do lots of online surveys. The space for focus groups is still so valuable, and you can do that without paying anyone. You can do that with your customer base. So being willing to do that, I think, is the main thing.
Fantastic. Thank you. A round of applause for Rich. Rich, thank you so much. Thanks. Yeah, let's keep the applause going. Fascinating. Really, really, really fascinating.
That was tremendous. Thank you, Rich. And just to pick up on a few things, of course, if you don't know about Mintel and the databases we have here at the BIPC, the BIPC stall that I mentioned outside has lots of leaflets and beautiful little postcards and things that you can pick up if you want to find out a bit more about that. And I think it would be remiss of me. I mean, I've already mentioned the startup guide. We also have our industry guide. So if you are working in a specific industry and you want a bit of a crash course in things to consider and data from that industry, they are all online, and you can also pick them up physically. You can pick those up physically over in the BIPC in the main library building.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, because there's a whole array of databases and data, millions of pounds worth that's available of research for free at BIPCs. We are edging very, very swiftly toward coffee. And I think that, I'm hoping that there's some more of those lovely croissants. Anyone had any of the lovely croissants and, pastries and so on? Yeah? And I'm hoping that there are going to be some more of those out there.
They were warm this morning. It was incredible.
They were really warm. They were really delicious this morning. Should we give them a bit of a teaser about some of the things that we can enjoy after coffee?
Absolutely, yeah.
First of all, immediately after coffee is something that you are the manager of.
Yeah, very close to my heart. So
Yeah.
I said at the start, I'm the Get Ready for Business Growth Manager. So that's the scale-up program here at the BIPC. When the Minister was giving Baroness Strykoff was giving a speech, she mentioned Women in Art Fair. That's a graduate of that program, along with many others. And you will see 4 of them, 3 of them, 4 of them? Three of them. 3 of them on this stage, speaking about their journey so far, what they wish they'd known when they started up, which is sort of next up after the coffee break. So,
fantastic.
Come back.
So come back, enjoy your coffee. Thanks, everyone, and thanks our morning speakers. Thank you so much. Thanks again, Rich. Thank you.